Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Australian Survivor Titans versus Rebels following week 3, and this was obviously a pretty interesting week. We got ourselves a triad swap, we got 3 tribals, each resulting in a relatively big outcome in terms of who went home based on these previous rankings. So again, there's a lot to break down here, but there are 19 players to talk about, and let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 19, we have the first boot from this week, and here we have Viola. And again, the fact that Viola goes home this early, especially after her connection with Valeria and Mark, is a bit shocking in my eyes. And now obviously within this episode, she got some interesting content, particularly with her wanting to go after Caroline, after Caroline knew that Mark, Valeria, and Viola were this trio. And the fact that she ends up on the losing side of this battle is a bit interesting in my eyes, especially considering that Caroline got almost no content in week 1. Now, I will also say that there was a bit of a red flag at the end of the previous week where she had gotten this visibility spike of her wanting to flip the vote to keep Nathan, only for her to not get her way there. So I do feel like that was a red flag definitely leading up into this episode, especially after she got a similar visibility spike in this one. And obviously with her being less focused on compared to Valeria, I guess you can say those were signs that she would be taken out here, even though I personally thought she would have made it further in the game. So obviously this was a pretty big blindside as well, but she is now out of the game, which is why she's here at number 19. Now moving on to number 18, we have the second boot from this week, and here we have Sarah, and I'm kind of disappointed that Sarah ended up being an early boot here, as I feel like there were some signs that she could have gotten this bigger edit down the road, as she seemed to be protected from some of the bad things about her game, such as losing Tobias early on. But at the same time, she was also pretty under-edited for a lot of the season, and there were definitely missed opportunities where she could have gotten content but simply didn't. And I'll also say that her boo episode here wasn't great either, where she ends up telling Kitty that she knows the vote's being split on her. Again, the way that she played this round was kind of sloppy, and it kind of made sense for her to go out here considering this content. So again, it's not particularly grand Sarah's end. I feel like there were definitely some missed opportunities with her edit to where she could have gotten more of a focus in the future had she been a top contender, but obviously she's not, and she's now out of the game, so because of that she's here at number 18. Now moving on to number 17, we have the final boot from this week's episodes, and here we have Garrick. And again, the fact that Garrick is an early boot is also pretty shocking, as I feel like he got some pretty decent content during the first 2 weeks, where even though he wasn't a massive character on the show, I feel like the content that he did get was pretty solid, and he seemed to be pretty aware about what was going on. But I will say that his actual boot episode wasn't particularly good for him, where he seemed pretty belligerent about going after Kirby right now, which felt pretty unnecessary considering that Ferris was already getting a decent amount of content about targeting Kirby from that side. So for him to get all this content and for him to just be so gung-ho about going for her right now just wasn't a good sign for me in terms of his survival here. And obviously he was taken out due to fear that Ferris would have another idol. But if you had told me at the beginning of this week that Garrick would be going out by the end of it, I would have been pretty shocked considering how strong of an edit he had gotten up to this point. But obviously, he's now out of the game as well, so he is here at number 17. And with that, there are 16 people left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win the game based off their edit and current game position. But number 16, the person I believe is the least likely to win from this point on, is Kitty. And like I said last week, Kitty's probably the most invisible person on the show, where it literally took until episode 8 for her to get a single confessional, and that confessional came at a point where she was absolutely necessary to be shown, that being during the scramble where Sarah and Rihanna told her that she was going to be blindsided by Mark, and obviously she gets to weigh in on that. But beyond that, pretty much nothing. No confessionals in episode 7, no confessionals in episode 9, and beyond that one confessional in episode 8, she doesn't really get to weigh in much on the actual vote. So again, I feel like she's pretty invisible up to this point, and while she's probably in a decent gain spot right now, I feel like the fact that the show is not showing her enough is a big reason why she's all the way at the bottom for me, so she's here at number 16. Now moving on to number 15, we have another player who is largely invisible in the show, and here we have Jaden. And I feel like this week, the bulk of Jaden's content was him just bench pressing random things around camp, which is pretty funny when you think about it, but is also a pretty bad sign for his chances. Now again, similar to Kitty, he's not in that bad of a position game-wise. He does seem to be voting within the majority, But again, the fact that the show is not really showing him at all, and I feel like the content that he has gone up to this point is pretty trivial and kind of jokey, makes me feel very unconfident that he's going to win by the end of it. So he's here at number 15. Now moving on to number 14, we have someone who got a little bit more this week. However, I can't say it's necessarily good content, and here we have Rihanna. And again, I feel like Rihanna's game up to this point has been incredibly rocky. Right off the bat, she gets a pretty bad swap, being down the numbers there. But even beyond that, we see her like openly distrusting Mark when Mark is trying to pull in the other rebels to blindside Caroline. And beyond that, you have her being completely outside of the votes here, being the sole vote for Mark, which even then was negated by an idol. And obviously she ends up losing Sarah, who is one of her numbers at that point. And again, I feel like Rihanna is probably in a pretty bad game spot at this point, and I feel like with her getting very minimal content outside of that, I just don't feel that great about her chances long term, where even if she makes it to the merge, I could easily see her being picked off by Ferris as a way of weakening Kirby. So again, there's a lot of things that could go wrong for Rihanna, and I feel like there's very little upside to her, both edit-wise and from a game position-wise, so because of that, she's here at number 14. Now moving on to number 13, we have another person who definitely got some content this week. However, I feel like it was mostly bad, and here we have Eileen. And again, Eileen was kind of invisible for a couple of episodes, only to get a resurgence in episode 9, where she was the main person wanting to get the rebels to stick together and take out one of the old titans, except she herself doesn't even go through with the plan, where she casts her vote onto Kelly for some reason, which I do find to be pretty funny. But even if it wasn't for that, I feel like it was so obvious from the edit that the rebels were just not going to stick together by the end of it, considering how deep the divide is between Ferris and Kirby. So either way, I feel like this is a bad look for Eileen, but the fact that it's bad on two fronts, the sense that the rebels don't sit together, and she herself votes for a fellow rebel. So again, I feel like it's pretty bad on multiple fronts, and I feel like with her getting a mostly inconsistent edit, where she's either completely invisible or just getting contradicted when she is shown, it's such a bad look for me that I have her here at number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and we have another person who I'm not feeling that great about at this point, and here we have Scott. And I feel like Scott's content up to this point has been pretty weird, where if we actually look at the game playing out, I feel like it's pretty clear that he's trying to play both sides, where he is like aligned with the Kirby side while still trying to maintain relations with Ferris. But then when we see like how it's playing out on the show, I feel like he fits pretty neatly within the Kirby side itself. And I feel like a lot of his content is tied to Kirby. So I feel like that's kind of a weird thing to break down. And I don't think it really bodes well for Scott either, where yes, he does get his intro package this week and we are learning more about him. But I feel like outside of that, his content has been mostly inconsistent, where again, he was mostly invisible these first couple of episodes. And since then, like his content's been kind of weird, sort of similar to Eileen's. Now, mind you, I don't think it's as negative as Eileen's, but I still feel like it's one that doesn't really lead to a win. It wouldn't shock me if he becomes collateral damage for a vote down the road, where maybe Ferris tries to take a shot at Kirby, only for that to backfire, and he has to resort to Scott instead. Kind of like what we saw with Garrick, like when Kirby wanted to take a shot at Ferris but couldn't do so. So I feel like I could see Scott falling down that road. But even beyond that, I feel like he's such a minor character within the actual story. I don't really see how he wins the game. So because of that, I have him here at number 12. Now moving on to number 11, and this is another person that I'm pretty conflicted on at this point, and here we have Raymond. And I feel like Raymond's someone who I've expected to get a visibility spike, however, it just hasn't really panned out up to this point, and I feel like he continues to get mostly background content, and even when he's shown, like he's kind of shown in weird situations, where again, like it seems like he's within like a clear group, that being with the Ferris group, but at the same time, like he's kind of being dunked on due to him like being in weird situations, where we saw in the most recent episode that he ends up trying to tell Kelly to not play her idol and that she should vote for Kirby, even though Kelly is clearly aligned with Kirby, and obviously that causes Kelly to run straight to Kirby and tell her that there's a blindside brewing. And again, that's pretty bad on Raymond's end, the fact that he's like telling one of Kirby's numbers that she's going after Kirby, so again, that's pretty bad. And again, with that being a lot of his content this week, it doesn't really bode well for his chances either. You also have him being the one to choose like which tribe he gets on after the swap, and he never really explains why he chooses to switch over to the Titans, where yes, it was still like early in the process and the tribes weren't really solidified yet, but still like I feel like that could have been an opportunity for him to weigh in, but it just doesn't. And again, I just feel out on Raymond at this point. I don't really see how he wins the game. So because of that, he is here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and this person has jumped up a little bit, not so much because this person has really jumped up too much, but more so because other people have gone down. but here we have Charles. And again, Charles is not winning the season. I feel like he's been one of the more invisible people on the cast, where really his content for this week comes from the latest episode, where obviously he is part of that Titans group that is essentially the swing votes coming into the tribal. And he does weigh in a bit on that, where he talks about how the Titans are sticking together and that they should use that to exploit the cracks on the rebel side. And they are successfully able to do that. And he himself gets to say that this is like revenge of the nerds. So again, that is at least some positive content here. But again, it is now episode 9, and he got pretty much nothing before that outside the intro segment of the premiere. So again, the fact that Charles of all people is getting to say this is a bit funny in my eyes. But again, he's not really winning the game either. It's more so other people going down that causes him to be higher on this list, which is why he is here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and I kind of can't believe this person is this high, but again, it's largely due to other people being pretty low that leaves her this high, and here we have Kelly. And obviously Kelly is not winning the game either. She's obviously a pretty bad player, and we saw more of that this week, where for one, we saw her being unable to tell the rebels what the dynamics were on the Titans, as she didn't really get the information there, despite her claiming to have bonded with a lot of the Titans. So I found that pretty funny. You have her like being like accused of having an idol, even though she doesn't. And even beyond that, like you have her like laying it on thick when she tries to pretend to people that she does have an idol. And then obviously you have her like being part of this vote, where she does get to be part of the majority here, taking out Garrick. Though at the same time, she does get a random vote from Eileen as well, someone who she supposedly was closer to than other people. So again, there's a lot to not like about Kelly, and I'm sure some people will want to have her towards the bottom. But again, she's at least on the show, she's at least getting content, and I feel like at this point, with her already having survived some early votes, I think it's pretty clear that she's just being dragged to the game by these people as they just see her as such a non-threat. I feel like she's not really going to be that much of a threat to win the game by the end of it, and I feel like people like Kirby have some use for her. So I feel like that was enough to at least have her this high on the list. The fact that she has gotten a bigger edit, and the fact that she at least has some prospects to get through the game, even though I feel like she's unlikely to win by the end of it. So because of that, I have her here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and we are going back to someone who has gotten not as much content on the show, and here we have Wina. And Wina got 0 confessionals this week, which isn't great, though at the same time we did see him like talking with the other Titans during episode 9, where he talks about wanting the Titans to be this block to essentially act as a swing vote. So again, we do at least see him talking some game, even though it doesn't translate to the confessionals. But again, I do feel like Wina has at least some prospects going for him. But beyond that, I mean, he's a pretty under-edited character and someone who I can't really have too much higher at this point. So because of that, I have him here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and we have someone who I am surprised is still around, but someone who has at least been set up as a major character. And here we have Alex. And I feel like Alex's game up to this point has been incredibly rocky as well, where I even know this in my Discord server, but of the people still in the game, Alex probably has the worst voting record, where out of 4 tribals he's attended where someone went home, he has voted correctly 0 times. And the one time he did vote correctly was at the non-elimination where Kelly was sent over in a unanimous vote. So again, he has been out of the loop for so much of the game at this point, and obviously this week wasn't great for him either, where he obviously gets a bad swap. He then fails to vote out Viola, and even throws a vote into Rihanna, one of his own rebels there, which is pretty bad. And then obviously he's out of the loop on the Sarah vote, taking out one of his numbers as well. So again, it's been a pretty rough ride for him. But again, I feel like he's at least been getting more content on the show. He is being set up as an underdog. And while I don't think it'll lead to a win by the end of it, where I feel like there's definitely some villainous aspects to his edit, I think the fact that he's at least being shown on the show is at least more than I can say about plenty of other people. But realistically, I don't think he's winning by the end of it. So because of that, he is here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we have someone who has gone downhill since the last time I talked about them. And here we have Mark. And obviously Mark has definitely played a bit sloppily here, where first up he loses Viola, one of his closer allies there, which on the face of it is pretty bad, but then he follows it up by trying to get revenge by taking out Caroline. And obviously that backfires as well, largely due to people like Rihanna and Sarah not being fully in his corner, where obviously Rihanna leaks the plan and she even votes against him, which is pretty funny. He obviously wastes his idol here as well, which obviously isn't great. And in general, he does seem to be going downhill. And from a pure gain standpoint, it wouldn't shock me if he's the next to go off his tribe if they ever go back to tribal. So obviously that's not particularly great. The reason I have him this high is he's at least on the show more than other people. And there's a world where his group could just went out to the merge, and at that point, like his rivalry with Caroline could continue there. And I feel like with Caroline, like not being in the best spot either to win the game, I feel like that at least opens it up for Mark to rebound. But realistically, I feel like I'm less and less confident that he'll actually win by the end of it. So he's here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and we have someone who I just mentioned, and here we have Caroline. And again, Caroline has won some battles here by taking out Viola first, winning that battle, and she's even able to beat Mark again the next round, where they are able to take out one of the rebels, that being Sarah. So again, I feel like Caroline, from a pure gain standpoint, is in a good spot, and if they are able to go back to Tribal, I feel like she probably will be able to take out Mark. The problem is that I feel like her edit before that point is kind of wonky, where obviously she was pretty invisible during week 1, and even when she was getting content later on, I feel like she was still being shown pretty negatively. And I feel like in terms of the long term of her game, I don't feel that great about Caroline actually winning the game, where I feel like even if she gets out Mark at some point, I feel like she'll just be taken out sooner rather than later anyway. So I feel like Caroline is probably not being set up to win by the end of it, given her negativity and given her lack of consistent content, which is a big reason I have her here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and I wasn't entirely sure what to do with this person. However, at number 4 we do have Eden. And I feel like Eden's a pretty interesting prospect at this point. Now I feel like his week 2 was pretty quiet, which isn't particularly great, and even this week wasn't that great for him outside of episode 7, where obviously he does get plenty to weigh in on with him breaking down the middle-aged mafia, and that he is kind of on board with taking out Viola at this next vote as a way of weakening Mark, and he is successfully able to do so. But then after that, he just doesn't really get much outside of that, which is a bit of a worry for me. Now, yes, there's this whole storyline of Caroline and Mark eating up more of Mark's content, so there's not really much room for Eden to be a part of that. But at the same time, while there are definitely some missed opportunities with his edit, I feel like he's not being overexposed either, which I feel like could be a pro for his edit. And I feel like he's someone who could definitely rebound after the merge if he is becoming more of a big player down the road. So again, I am kind of conflicted on Eden at this point, but I feel like compared to everyone else who I feel like have pretty major holes in their edits, I feel like Eden kind of belongs here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and I'm not entirely sure what to make of this person either. I actually feel like there's a chance that this person could be taken out soon, but number 3 we do have Kirby. And obviously Kirby's a pretty major character on the show, namely due to her rivalry with Ferris. And to be fair, she has been getting her way in the actual game, where obviously she just took out Garrick, who is a pretty big number for Ferris' side. And obviously with her being able to pull in the Titans for that vote, I feel like she is currently getting a 1-up on Ferris. But at the same time, I feel like if we are looking at the edit, I do feel like Ferris is being shown as the bigger character of the two. And I feel like he's being shown in the more positive light compared to Kirby. Where if I had to guess, I feel like Ferris will probably get the upper hand taking out Kirby down the road when that eventually culminates. So that was a big question mark for me over whether I should have Kirby lower or not, as I feel like when it comes down to it, I feel like she will lose the war against Ferris. But I feel like compared to everyone else, I feel like if Kirby is able to win that battle and if the tides turn, then I feel like Kirby will be in a pretty solid spot to do well within the game moving forward. So I feel like that's a big reason why I still have her this high, even though I feel like there's still a lot of risk with her going out soon. But again, it's that risk that largely keeps her from being in the top spot for me. So because of that, I have her here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, when we have someone who I just mentioned, and here we have Ferris. And again, I feel like Ferris is kind of in a similar boat to Kirby, where he's obviously a pretty big character, has a pretty big rival that is gunning for him. And obviously he just got left out of a vote, where obviously he just lost Garrick, who's a pretty big number for him, despite Eileen trying to get him to play his idol on Garrick, only for that to backfire. So from a pure gain standpoint, I feel like Ferris is not in that good of a spot right now. And obviously there's still plenty of concern that he could be taken out soon and that he's being overexposed, not unlike what we saw with George in recent seasons. But the main reason I have him above Kirby is that I feel like while this week was a setback for Ferris, I feel like eventually Ferris will be able to get a 1-up on Kirby, where I feel like there are plenty of opportunities for him to regain the numbers, particularly after the merge. He obviously has an idol that he can work with, and I feel like within the edit, he's being shown more positively compared to Kirby, and I feel like he's more so set up to be the main character of the season compared to Kirby. So I feel like all those things add up for him to be this high on the list, as I feel like he's someone who will definitely make a deep run on the season. But at the same time, I feel like he may not actually win by the end of it. I fear that he may succumb to the same thing that George did, where even though he was this major character, he'll come up short by the end of it, and that's a big reason why I can't have him any higher than number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Australian Survivor Titans vs Rebels at this point is still Valeria. And I feel like this week really solidified Valeria's spot as the top contender even more than last week, where I feel like she got pretty solid content for this being the swap episode, where obviously she is swapped into a bad position initially where she is down in numbers, but we are still getting her perspective clearly, where obviously she talks about being down the numbers and that the bear within her is ready to fight. We see her later bonding with all the rebels and that the Titans are solidifying their spot as the swing votes. She recognizes the divide between Ferris and Kirby and that that's a perfect spot for her to work their way in. She says that she thought that she needed to seduce Ferris to get him on her side, only for Ferris to do the work for her by making his opposition to Kirby pretty well known. So again, kind of undercutting Ferris there, so I feel like that's a pro. And even beyond that, like, we are still getting her perspective while not being overshadowed either. Like, she is shown like laying out her game position in a way that's not in your face. Now, the one knock you can point to is that she had almost nothing to say about the Viola boot, where obviously Viola was someone she was shown being close to early on. Obviously, they were talked about as being this duo. And then obviously when Viola is taken out, Valeria herself doesn't have much to say about that. However, even then, I feel like that can be excused by two things. One is the fact that Valeria was on a different tribe and that she wasn't blindsided herself when Viola was taken out. And plus, I feel like in the episodes leading up to the Viola boot, I feel like the focus was more so on how Mark and Viola were working together and that how they were more of a duo. So even then, I don't think that's that big of a negative in the grand scheme of things. And we see Valeria making up for it with the stuff that she is doing on her side of things. So I think Valeria, all things considered, has the most well-rounded edit up to this point, and I feel very confident that it'll continue in the future. Now, yes, I will also admit that I've been kind of dunked on in terms of my rankings, where obviously top contenders have gone out. I mean, just look at the 3 boots from last week. But I feel like Valeria has continued to hold up in her edit even after the swap, and I feel like that's a big reason why I have her in top contention for me. So because of that, I do have her here at number 1. And there we go, that will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, really helps out with the channel. And I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so you can look forward to that. I am still covering the Traders US Season 2, so you can expect weekly power rankings of that show. I am starting a whole bunch of new shows soon, including Survivor 46, Big Brother Canada 12, and The Amazing Race 36, so you can expect power rankings of those shows. I'm on Patreon now, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description, and you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.